What up y'all, it's TTR, and today we're going to be talking about a very interesting idea. I had this written down around the time that we were talking about the Legend ZA logo being about Zygarde on the left and Rayquaza on the right, because it looks a lot like Mega Rayquaza when it's Mega Evolved, which would be such an odd take. Also, the colors line up, right? The black with Zygarde, the green with the Rayquaza. It's something interesting to think about. Also, I'm recording this like right before that video about the unevolved megas goes up. So I'm curious to see how people would react to that. Hopefully, Game Freak actually does what I said, makes me look smart. Anyhow, let's get into this theory very fast. So this actually builds off a couple of videos I made in the past. The main one is the video I made talking about how Zygarde is a synthetic Pokemon. Something made in a lab, which is not something said in any lore in any of the Pokemon games, but it's just something I feel when you look at it, right? It's made of hexagons, it splits around and looks. It could be a natural Pokemon monitoring the ecosystem, but it almost feels like a kind of weapon or something made to monitor the ecosystem artificially. It's like a policeman Pokemon watching over everything, and that's why it can split itself like that. It's named Zygarde, and it also has like zygote in its name. This is something I didn't mention in that video, and zygotes are pretty much the start of a new life. When an egg has been fertilized, this is the birth of something. Zygarde's name has zygote in it. It represents the beginning stage of something that can evolve into other things. Sounds like Zygarde is like this ultimate zygote made in a lab that can, once it grows up, can split its cells to monitor the ecosystem and then combine a few of those cells to create different organisms. And also, Zygarde's name in Japanese is still Zygarde, just said in Japanese. It's like Zygarde or something. So it still has the same name origin. Think about why they made that the origin to Zygarde's name, something so scientific. You see, Zygarde also feels a lot like it could have been the world serpent from Norse mythology, right? So they could have made its name a spin on Jormungandr. But no, they chose Zygarde. A freaking zygote is in its name. So I know it sounds out there right now, the notion Zygarde's artificially made, some kind of synthetic creature, but that's the idea I'm building off. So let's put that on the back burner for a second. There's a very different Pokemon that exists in the same Mega Evolution world, Rayquaza. This is a Pokemon AZ saw with his own eyes, stopping Primal Kyogre and Groudon. And it's a Pokemon that's very reminiscent to Zygarde. It counters Kyogre and Groudon's abilities. Rayquaza does this a bit more passively. The normal Rayquaza's ability is airlock. The point is, Groudon would be like intensifying the way the sun strikes to make the sunlight harsher, and then Kyogre would be drawing in rain clouds to make that thunderstorm happen. But Rayquaza's not doing anything like that. Its ability sounds like it's just countering Kyogre and Groudon, but there's a natural feel to it, regardless. And this is what I like about it, especially when you go into Mega Rayquaza, you can see what airlock really is. When they overclock airlock, it turns into Delta Stream. Delta Stream is a super airlock where rather than making the skies clear, now it makes it all windy. I remember thinking how natural they made Rayquaza feel when they introduced Delta Stream back in 2014. And this is the idea I want y'all to focus on, right? So remember I said AZ is watching when Kyogre and Groudon are fighting, and this creature comes down and naturally is able to stop the two. And AZ gives a little speech talking about how Rayquaza, or Mega Rayquaza, is the Delta, born in times of strife and all, and Delta means to create change. So it's something like when Kyogre and Groudon are about to destroy Hoenn and parts of the world, change is born within that turmoil, and Rayquaza is that change. Now, he's just being poetic about it, because it's not like Rayquaza was just born in that instant. But remember, we don't have the full story of Pokemon X and Y, so when you look at AZ's dialogues at moments like that, you can try to pick it apart and see what some untold lore behind X and Y story could be. Here's when we get to the theory. Whoever made it, Zygarde was made in a lab from Rayquaza. Zygarde, in some weird way, is an artificial Rayquaza. The first time Zygarde was leaked and we learned about its abilities and all, the first thing it reminded me of, and I'm sure it reminded a lot of people of, is this is just Rayquaza again. Zygarde's ability just neutralizes Xerneas and Yveltal. We've seen this exact thing again. It almost felt like Game Freak couldn't come up with new ideas. After Dialga and Palkia, then Zekrom and Reshiram, they just went back to another Kyogre and Groudon. Xerneas' Drizzle was just that life aura, Yveltal's Drought was just that dark aura, Zygarde neutralizes them. And Zygarde is this green serpent. It's a dragon type. It legit felt like Game Freak, they were writer's blocked or something. They just couldn't come up with a different concept for a group of legendaries. They just did Rayquazas again. But now in hindsight, right? Now that we're in 2024 and we saw that teaser for Pokemon Legends ZA, look at that logo, right? If that really is Zygarde on the left, Rayquaza on the right, and the theory I'm saying here is true, then what the logo is really showing is the artificial and the original. And that starts to dive into an interesting idea. The first layer to this is that Rayquaza is this natural Pokemon that can Mega Evolve. Seemingly the first Mega Evolution. The fact that Game Freak threw that curveball, instead of just making Primal Rayquaza where it gets consumed as well, they made it a Mega Evolution, which it can control, and two, they made it a natural Mega Evolution, which brings up an interesting possibility that Rayquaza could have existed without the AZ war happening. Rayquaza could be something linked to the true origin of Mega Evolution, even though it's just an old Hoenn Pokemon. So maybe if scientists witnessed Rayquaza as this interesting Pokemon capable of Mega Evolution, or even without being capable of Mega Evolution, it's able to reverse Kyogre and Groudon, and Kyogre and Groudon have been fighting, and Rayquaza always comes down and stops them. AZ just saw it the time they did it 1,000 years ago. If it was known that this cycle always happens and Rayquaza is this Pokemon that can naturally counter them, it could make sense that when concerned with the idea of Xerneas and Yveltal being threatening, that they used Rayquaza in this concept of it being able to neutralize things, and they made Zygarde out of it. And since it was scientifically made, it's more intense than Rayquaza's Airlock, where Aura Break, look at even the name, bro, it's so offensive sounding. It's made to actually reverse the life and death aura. Then you look at AZ's quote calling it the Delta, born in times of strife. Think of Rayquaza being something ancient Kalosians just know. And so AZ, when he looks at Rayquaza, he knows what that is, he always has. And he knows that that Delta Pokemon is what they used to make Zygarde. So he's just casually looking at Rayquaza appearing again, knowing how impressive that Pokemon is, that they're able to use its DNA to make this artificial counter to Xerneas and Yveltal. The first reason they need to counter Xerneas and Yveltal is just because they're powerful Pokemon. But here's a second idea. What if Zygarde isn't actually meant to counter Xerneas and Yveltal? That's the notion we get because of its ability. But what if what Zygarde really is supposed to counter life energy and death energy? That Xerneas and Yveltal weren't actually a threat. It's only when people in some way get their hands on life energy, or like AZ did making the ultimate weapon, getting life and death energy, that they made Zygarde to make sure people can't second-handedly use that. And so the reason Zygarde can counter Xerneas and Yveltal is not because Xerneas and Yveltal are a problem, it's just a byproduct of Zygarde naturally being able to counter that energy. I know it's a weird idea, but think about it for a bit and that's interesting. And the reason they would use Rayquaza for this is because it's the Delta, right? The Pokemon that can bring about change. Born from disturbances, Rayquaza could be some very adaptable Pokemon that does whatever it can to do what it needs. So Rayquaza, with its strong sense to protect, could have that special factor needed to then create the counter to life and death out of it. A Pokemon that can maintain order. Looking at that logo, and potentially that being Rayquaza on the right, and thinking of Kalos scientists seeing how well Rayquaza defends Earth from the skies and wanting a protector on the ground, it's a weird idea to think they made a ground type Rayquaza in some way. Now it's not a Rayquaza, it just has some of Rayquaza's genes. Rayquaza would be the base of what Zygarde is, but it's entirely its own Pokemon, right? Splitting its cells, making different forms of itself. But it's a weird idea that if you were to like DNA analyze it, it would say like it's 50% Rayquaza genes. And then there's something else that's been happening recently, which is in the anime. You know, in the anime, they're hunting down this black Rayquaza, right? Which in hindsight, it sounds like Pokemon might have given them notes that could extend past the Indigo Disc to the new era of Pokemon 2. Because they're still hunting Rayquaza. Here's what's weird, right? The Rayquaza they're hunting is a black Rayquaza. It's a shiny Rayquaza. Something popped up in the show recently that the evil team's leader has. It's a Zygarde. It's not just any Zygarde. It's a shiny Zygarde. Isn't that so weird? You got a shiny Rayquaza here we're theorizing Zygarde is made from Rayquaza, and the Zygarde they decide to introduce is shiny as well. It would be so interesting if Legend ZA this is what they're revealing, but they do it cleverly. They don't directly reveal that Zygarde is Rayquaza. They do it by just showing overlaps between the two. Like if in some weird situations, like in that video we talked about beyond 100% Zygarde potential, if Zygarde, you start to see interesting delta-like patterns on it at times. You have documents found in labs talking about both Zygarde and Rayquaza with missing blacked out lines in between, just implying some lore between the two. You could even have in Legend ZA, whatever the evil team is, they're trying to lure out Zygarde and capture it. So maybe if Zygarde gets captured at one point in the game and they're studying it, imagine one line of dialogue says, Zygarde has an unusual organ. This organ seems to make it capable of mega evolving, right? In the modern day, this exact dialogue pops up concerning Rayquaza, where they say, I've dubbed it the Mikado organ. Back then, it wouldn't be called anything. But imagine that overlap, where Zygarde 2 naturally has the Mega Stone organ. By just showing enough overlaps but never saying it, it would be a way to reveal it in a clever way that Zygarde is Rayquaza, made from Rayquaza. It also makes sense, right? Z doesn't sound like it's supposed to exist. Just there being an X and a Y sound like all it's supposed to be, a duo legendary, like Zacian and Zamazenta. The Z doesn't belong. And how weird if somehow you're able to mega evolve Zygarde that it actually starts to get Rayquaza-like features. We'll see, y'all. That's pretty much it. Shank that like button. I'll see you on the next one. Take care.